The nobleman's son in John's gospel is called, I think the word is basilikos. And what in ancient times a basilikos was, is a nobleman. But in those times of the Old Testament, those noblemen had no I. And as we know, Christ is the I am and the seed force. As we see in this, it talks about that. I think it does anyway. He is that I am behind your I am. Everyone, don't forget to join the Greenwood Fellowship on my website. It's incredibly rewarding and beneficial to have a walled garden of other serious people on this path of initiation, to share experience and wisdom together as we all progress. You'll have access to membership videos, the second half of all lectures and streams, monthly think tanks with senior members, senior group streams on our YouTube, and soon in-person events, conferences and meetups. Please join the fellowship. And in those times, and even Evola talks about this when he talks about the Imperium, is that noblemen don't have their own I. That term means kingsman. It means that you are actually a clone of the king. You're part of the king's principality, and his demon kind of possesses you in a way. And so how this works is through heredity, that slow weakening, and this also is connected to the weakening of aristocratic bloodlines. This happens because this explains it partly because they don't have their own spiritual development. They're not the spiritual head of the family. And so he is, again, essentially the pawn of a wider distributed cognition, a wider egregore, you could call it, of a temporal system coming from the initiative of the king. So he doesn't have his own initiative. Who grants initiative? Christ does. Clean initiative, anyway. So that's what's going on here. And you can see that in the change of the name. So and his son has that because of hereditary sin, because Golgotha hasn't happened yet. So these are also signs that point towards Golgotha as well. And so that nobleman asked for Jesus to heal his son, who is taken ill. But that illness is because of this. Because physicality of the son is connected to the actions of the father. The father's has no initiative, then there will be a physical weakness in the son. In Old Testament times, that's how it works. So this healing has to do with a retrochronic healing, which means Jesus does the healing backward in time because of the father's collective sin. So the father has to make a deep acknowledgement of Jesus, who is the I am and provides those forces of the I that he is, because he's the seed of the kingdom of heaven. And so Jesus asks him to. I can't remember what the exact quote is. Do I have it there? Except ye see wonders, ye will not believe. So it has to come from within. You must recognize the Christ first. And so he does. And then Christ, he says, your son is healed. You can go. And at that very moment, his son was healed, which he finds out later. But it was required that the father did that. The father had to do that. The father had to acknowledge it because of his sin, because of that bloodline. He had to accept it because he's the leader of the household, and it's connected in horizontal heredity. So what this is really is, and what you have to do, so your kids, it's changing the illnesses of heredity to the healing of heredity. And this happens when you're the head of a household too. You can hurt your household by your lack of spirit and your lack of development and lack of connection to the true father. You have to acknowledge, not heredity. And this is again a healing of the fall. It's a healing of something that happened in the fall, where the father becomes heredity. It becomes a similarity to who came before you. And what is that? A similarity to the original Adam, who is corrupted because of primordial sin. And so this is a healing of that it's healed in totality in Golgotha. But in this healing, it has to happen to the individual. And this is a prototype or an archetype of this healing that can always happen for you because Golgotha has occurred and the healings have occurred. But this transformation of the father-son relationship is showed in this. But what it is a requirement that you acknowledge your true father, because you're the image and likeness of God, as the creation story says. And that is what, with Jesus, as Jesus goes back into the past and heals that, and that heals the Son. But it comes from the acknowledgement of the Father, of the true Father. And you can also see this in St. John's Gospel when, after he acknowledges Christ essentially deep in his being as the Father, his Father, who he's really descends from and has to work towards to become like the new Adam, not the old Adam. John changes the words that he uses to describe the man. He stops calling him Basilikos and starts calling him Anthropos, human being, because of the acknowledgement of the true archetype. I say archetype is a temporalish word, but what all that means is simply true father, true thing that you descend from above and are supposed to become like. Not just like, but that's what theosis is in Orthodoxy. They really understand that. And so also, he changes the name. Once he gets home, he changes the descriptive name of the nobleman to head of the household once he gets home. And so this also points to this idea or this truth that man as a spiritual leader of the household affects the whole household. And that household receives him, and illnesses are created based on if that man is a true man of spirit and Christ, then your wife will be obedient to you because you will have authority, because you will be like, to be capable of and to know is authority. And when that's related to Christ, it's something within you that's greater than what we can determine from physicality and the five senses in their low Adam-like state. You have something. It's something dox is granted to you. Other people notice that at an unconscious level. So that's what happens. It's a healing of heredity, collective sin. I think I got every point there that I've got in this slide, but no responsibility, child weak, healing of sickness, horizontal heredity, that reinstatement of the heredity of the new Adam. Yeah, I think I spoke about everything there. And so, and there's truth in that. That's one part I missed. There's truth in that is that the Lord doesn't want you to be merely like the king's man is, a technical supplicant in a hierarchy of power. He wants a hierarchy of authority where, because the people that are ruling have true substance, have true essence, have true God with them, and are united with him and close to him, which gives them true substance, they naturally will be followed because people sense the good in those people. Hierarchy is a good thing, but it needs to be a hierarchy of authority. It's a transformation of this illness, because you deny Christ when you throw away your collective, when you throw yourself away in your free collaboration with him and in his free hierarchies, you jump into the collective rage of communism or mustache man or whatever that may be that's collective. and throw all responsibility away. You enter an egregore and it possesses you. And so there's a truth there with the king. That's what can happen with a king. But that doesn't happen in Christian kingship. Kingship is great. You want a king, but he is in a proper hierarchy of authority. Then it's not a degenerate power structure that we face today. So, yeah. Do you want to be possessed? So he had to, the nobleman had to accept it. Not the demon possession of the cult of kings, but in a free collaboration based on the acceptance of Christ as the king and the true father. So you have to do that too. And so there's a connection there with I am the way, the truth, and the life, because when you acknowledge that he is the true ideal and the new Adam, of course, you start walking towards the way, truth, and life. You will towards him. He's the will. He's the truth to which my will aspires. The way to which my will is constantly trying to catch up with and understand for active free collaboration, and the life from which my will emerges, from my will is launched. That's what we aspire to in trying to follow divine will and providence. And we'll get to that life, which other healings are involved with. So that's very important. Next, healing of the lame. So this one's related to forgiving sins. And I don't need to read that. And which day of creation was that? Maybe I do need to read it. Fifth day of creation, third miracle. I am the door. This is related to will and ensouled movement, which happens on that day of creation. And so this lame man, even though he's been without legs his whole life, this particular miracle, for reasons that are very complicated, that I don't want to go into, that perhaps we can talk about in the second half of the stream, which will be a conversation in the Discord, and you can become a member, and we can have that and when we have the group discussion after we finish this stream, we can talk about that. But it's very esoteric as to the reasons why. But this is about individual sin, this one. This man is lame because of individual sin. And we know that because Jesus talks about it. Sin no more and nothing worse may befall you. It's about egoism and a lack of care for conscience, which is related to and humanity and the world, because you've unplugged yourself from that world movement, which is related to that the creation, or the day of creation. But it's also related to the pool. The pool has 5 arches you can see here. That's related to the wholeness of the human organism that he's also disconnected from. And that wholeness of the human organism is when the 5 currents of the will are made into, and you see there's 5 here, 5 currents of the will made into 5 wounds, and they're riveted to revelation and the 10 Commandments, which is, what is that? It's a development of conscience, which is your transcendent self, which is, connected to what Jung talked about when he talked about the self, but it's beyond that. The total man. Will you be made whole in a total way? And that is to heal the will, to heal the low movement, which is also connected to primordial sin. But in this chap's sense, it's connected to, but it's the world and outside. It's outside temporality, which is the angel, and it's also disconnected from the will of the world, because you can see that in the fact of the pool, which the lame man is next to, and people go into this pool and an angel will heal them. But he can't because he's lame. He can't walk, and no one will help him, and that's because of his sin previously. That no one will help him because he hasn't cared about world, nor has he cared about his own angel. an outside temporality. So he's egoistic. It's about the individual. And that's what we are in the Adam state, in the first Adam state. It comes from also the past and what has been. Our sins hold us back and create a destiny which forces the future that we're to be, which ends up being just a projection of the past. So the sin has to go, and that happens through forgiveness, of course, too. But in this particular miracle, you can see that two different things that he needs to make up for that he sinned against. He sinned against conscience, which is your guardian angel. He sinned against humanity in the past. And you can see that when Christ says, rise and take up your pallet. Rise is a healing of the vertical, a healing towards the 5-arched pool by riveting the will by the forgiveness of sins, which that arbitrary will created. As you might have seen in previous streams, that arbitrary will is a factor that's tied up with sin and related to the Luciferian, because it's about your arbitrary gain and will to power, grasping it at the expense of others, trying to advance at the expense of others. And so this is the healing of that. But it is important to understand that the healing of ensouled movement for this man is horizontal as well. It's about you living on the earth. You're not checking out. Your legs aren't crossed like the yogi. Because someone asked also in one of the comments, said, can I do breathing exercises from yogiism? Or I didn't say yogiism, just breathing exercises and crossing of my legs. The thing about crossing of the legs is when you lift your legs off the floor, that is a pose that is related to the Luciferic state that they seek, which is a checking out. It's nirvana. It's not about saving. The Lord, it's about depersonalization. It's about not having human feet anymore. And as we know, the Lord is both man and God. He came so we'd have life abundantly. And so when we do our practices and our prayers, we sit in a chair because that's a synthesis of the active and passive, which is what you're supposed to be in the final analysis, is the saving person that's both in the divine world and in the world. Yes, we're not of this world, but we're here to save it. That's the state that Christ was. So that's why, no, you shouldn't use the cross-legged pose, because your feet are off the ground, seeking to check out in nirvana, not to save. And those poses matter. So, and the breath, I'll talk about it at a different time. But basically, no, because the breath is supposed to be connected with the Lord moving your breath later on, not you doing it like the Übermensch. So, yeah, went on a bit of an aside there, but the point is, you're in egoism, you unplug yourself from the world. But in your unconscious, you're like a whirlpool in a wider sea. That whirlpool goes outside your body. Everything you do, your will, your feeling, and your thought is in that whirlpool. So as an egoist, you become rigid and lame, and you can't move anymore because you're not connected to that. So what is healed here is both, because of his sin. But the sins are healed, are forgiven. And the Lord does this. And you can go to my Forgiveness is Practice video, look for that. And that is the process that we're talking about here. But what is restored, how does this relate to initiation? Well, in initiation, and it's a long process, but what is restored is the divine faculty of revelatory action, of intuition, which is related to will and movement and divine will. You begin to be able to sense, because it goes because as you move towards the new Adam, you leave the old Adam and his sins, and you go to it's like you have the faculties of before the fall. That's the idea. And so, not the idea, it's the fact. It's the fact that I know well. And so you have an understanding of conscience, which is conscience, divine will. In the past, people talked a lot about negative conscience, where you'd feel something was wrong before you'd do it. And in the normal factical modern state, you might get that sometimes, but it's tied up with all your impulses and such. So, which is connected to your sin. So through forgiveness and through the abandoning of sin And through riveting of the will and through the three oaths, you start to move away from the arbitrary and you can trust your instinct then. But that takes time. You have to stop sinning first. You have to ask for forgiveness for everything first. Then this becomes available and it can be trusted because it might not be providence. So sometimes conscience, which is your guardian angel, when it's outside anyway, outside temporality. Yeah, when you're in a low state, you can't trust that voice. But as you progress in terms of the phenomenology of it, there's a discernment you get where you can tell that is an impulsion from the divine, from the Lord. And that's related to the spiritual faculties I've talked about before, which is like mystic touch, and positive conscience feels like a positive impulsion, essentially. But more and more that can be trusted as you purify yourself. But you have to go through purification first. And so this healing is about that restoration. And Christ is always doing that healing again. And that's why it occurs in initiation as well. So, yeah, that's the faculties of will that are restored here. And the will becomes a way of, it turns into a sense once you rivet yourself to revelation and the 10 Commandments and the 3 oaths. So that's how it relates to initiation. And you can, again, you can see that through rise and take up your pallet. It's both horizontal and vertical. So it is related to how you treat people in the world as well. You have to, that's why you have to go through forgiveness, but also bless people. Like I've talked about in previous videos, blessing people you walk past. The yappy devil will say, fatty, or whatever, but you bless them, bless people you walk past. It all not works. It all matters and it all has an effect, especially when you're involving yourself and your relationship is close with the Lord. You ask the Lord to bless them and he will. You're collaborating with the Lord. And so what a great gift you can give to that person without them even knowing, because you don't want anything in return. You're just doing it because this is what we do. So, and that stuff works. Prayer works. That's why in the Discord we have a prayer request room, which you can go and become a member at scottmanu.com/membership. Not meaning to put an ad in here, but yeah, it's a great blessing to have an internet archipelago where you can ask for prayers and people that have like mind can pray for each other. It's beautiful. So the restoration of true sight, which before the fall existed, the transcendent self and empirical self were connected. What happened when Adam did what he did was the empirical sight became cynical. So it was just your 5 senses, and I guess you could call it Canian sight too. Just seeing the material. But there are twilight senses, you could call them as well, which the 2 fishes sort of stand for. Unless you sight became cynical unless you use these humanistic developments, which are polluted, unfortunately, because they're still related to the first Adam, not the new Adam, not Christ. And so with this miracle, the blind man, it's not to do with his past. It's not to do with sin. He's blind for the sake of providence, for the sake of showing you and us what will be. He was blind to facticity of the physical world, so he wouldn't be polluted by it. But you can see, I mean, these are very mysterious things that you can delve into. And like I said, even mystically at the deepest level, there's more and more that will always be unpacked from this. But the pool that he washes in, well, let's talk about the day of creation first in terms of what we're dealing with. The second day of creation. This is the separation. It's the Lord is the light. He's also all these other things, but he is the light of the world. He is the Logos. He is the sending that connects the sender to the receiver. I don't like those words. But he is the loving that connects the lover to the loved, the real or the multiplicity to the thought of God, to the ideal. Again, these are Platonic terms, which I hate using, but it helps people who like philosophy to understand what's going on. So, on the second day of creation, he divided the waters. He is the firmament that also divides the waters above and below, the movement above and below, or the receptive above and below. And so this pool that's there is also him in terms of what has been, in terms of the Logos reflection below the firmament in creation. Because there's fallen things below the firmament, but there's also him below the firmament, which the pool relates to. The pool's name means sent. What is sent of, in Heideggerian terms, what is sent of being that is of essence? What is brought in that is of essence? And so what's connected with that is the restoration of the two seers, the sight of the transcendent self. And what this means with its connection to initiation is the sight so not just divine instinct, but also the different faculties, spiritual touch, but also what Jung calls active imagination in initiation is when it's cleaned, when it's purified, when this is fully restored by God, by the Lord, it's overlaid over what you see factically, over what you see empirically in terms of the senses. And it reveals through its light the water that has already been sent. It reveals through its light God working both in the creation, in its coinciding with what happens in events in the world, and also what that transparency shows you. Because active imagination is something that can show you things symbolically or otherwise, but it's over that. So you could call it Gnostic. Again, don't get scared by that word. It just means knowing, but divine knowing. It's not like Gnosticism is bad. It's all that stuff that connected with that word is bad. Because if it's on its own, without mystic and the loving relationship with God, and without mystic touch and spiritual touch, as we talked about before, in mysticism, without doxa, it's pointless and nonsense. It's dead. It's knowing without the ground of religion, which is mysticism. It's dead. So all that stuff is dead, or derivative, or polluted, unless it's connected with doxa, unless it's connected with the ground, the essence. Without mysticism, all this stuff is dead. Anything related to anything. Without the raw contact with God at the deepest level, this stuff is all dead. But this particular miracle is dealing with that. The very next step after that of the receptive, the very next step after, which you see in my stream on different mysticisms, the very next step is the hay of Yod Hey Vav Hey. It's the receptive principle. It is water that reflects that first mystic touch, that first spiritual touch. But anyway, I'm not really talking about the faculties there. I'm just trying to articulate what occurs and what's restored. And that's seen in the Bible quote where it says, "Thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh to thee." You have this Gnostic sight, and you see me physically. So the transcendent self and the empirical self has been restored. The vision of the pre-fallen state is what's been given to the man that was blind. So that's what occurs. And it's also related to, as you can see in my notes here, is that it's healing with the aid of two waters, the spittle closest to the word, accompanying and mirroring it, which was mixed with earth, and the water from the pool, which means sent, which flowed forth from the earth, as reflected the Logos inside temporality. And so This is also all related to, well, I've sort of talked about that already. But here's an important quote. For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind. So what's he talking about here? Those who see are those who have faculties that pre-Christ coming religions or humanistic practices have specialized in. That's the site of the old Adam, though, and corrupted. And so a lot of those ways also don't work anymore, as we know from the last prophecy or of the Oracle of Delphi was, my waters have run dry. But in terms of what the yogis do and such, this is what this applies to as well. Those that came before me are thieves and robbers. Those who see before me must become blind first. So if there's any development, because those ways are the ways of depersonalization. Christ is human and God. He came so we could live abundantly, not to depersonalize. Depersonalizing is the Luciferic way. And because Lucifer is about freedom, it's about just seeking freedom from temporality. No, the Lord wants us in temporality to save it, not to collaborate with him, not to be just his extension, and also not to be up there in the clouds and not be participating in the saving. You see, it's not calling these other religions and humanisms, it's the devil. No, it's because there's a very subtle deception at the ground of it. Yes, they help people. Yes, they specialize, help them with their faculties, but it's ultimately depersonalizing. It's ultimately doing something that God didn't make us for. It's ultimately making you not a son. It's making you something that's no longer human. Because the ultimate divinity is person, is moral. The ultimate ground of reality is love. And so when you're depersonalizing, you're making yourself into Aramanic. You're making yourself into a piece of technology, which unfortunately is satanic. And again, there's a stigma with the word satanic, and there should be. But satanic means that dead technical will to power of technology. That's what it means. It's depersoned. Person isn't an additive. Person, the personal of the Father and of moral logic, is the ground of reality. It's gotten the wrong way around in modernity, and it takes all this practice to see the truth of that. That the truth is that the divine is a person and the Son is begotten. He's not a divine mover. He's not what the deists think. The Son's begotten from the Father. It's the personal and it's the word of the personal and of love that you show to him that he responds to. And that's what truly is divine. And so you're actually de-divinizing by doing these practices that depersonalize. That was the mistake. That's why those that came before him are thieves and robbers. And so he's restoring that sight to be able to see him working in creation. And you see that. You see the miraculous. My God. And it's proven through the Hermetic epistemic principle, which uses that's all I can say. It uses the different faculties and the epistemic principle to help you find the truth of the things that you see. The coincidence of all these things together. As I've got here, the light of the upper eye coinciding with what you're seeing miraculously in reality, something way above chance. Those things together used and shown to you, and this happens. You will be astonished by what you see in this. Astonished. You'll just shake your head. You shake your head and go, my gosh, how wondrous is how you actually do work in creation. How you actually do. Once you have to stop sinning first, then you are granted. Then he shows himself to you. But it's just you shake your head in astonishment. And you can only tell Christians who understand. You go, who can I tell? I want to tell them about this. They just won't believe it. Right? You have to go through all this argument to try to show them. And they just won't believe it. My God, because those proofs they're personal, but also it's completely impossible that it's chance. Because you've seen it again and again. But it's not scientific. You can't set up an experiment. That's just not how it works. But it demonstrates itself to you in an unshakable way. And not just as a feeling or anything like that. In terms of just eyewitness fact, it's just so much above probability of chance. Yeah, you eventually become astonished at the miracles that occur again and again and the coincidences that occur again and again. And you're being careful. You're using the Hermetic epistemic principle. This is not just... like I've said so many times, it's not confirmation bias. I know all those things. I know the logical fallacies. I know all that stuff. But you'll just be astonished. And the coinciding of the different senses help prove it, right? Just like it does with consilience in your normal senses, where you can touch something, you can hear something, you can see something. Therefore, it helps you establish you have an eyewitness account of, okay, that's real. The same thing with the higher faculties, which we'll learn a little bit more about in the next miracle. But basically, there are two sights that are restored. But it's deeply related to how he works, both in you, metaphysically. This is a very metaphysical one, which I won't be able to... I mean, you could do half a stream on just this. But I've sort of articulated the basic outline of it, and that he is the sending and the sent. And also inside with you, once he is sent from the future, once he is sent, he is that sent that the pool is. So he's also with you until the end of time. In a very real way, he's been brought in because you've stopped sinning. Because the Logos is all these I ams. It's just underneath the factical world of the lie of modernity as it presents to you is him as all these different I ams that you can have a factical, real, true access to by going through this process, by participating in the religion. And how hard is it? That's why it's the crown of thorns, because the religion is constantly trying to show people that this is true. But the serpent is so crafty. Scientism is so crafty that's gotten in the way that you have to know and understand this deep philosophy of people like Heidegger to get to the position where you can see, especially intellectual types. You have to. But we are reaching a time where it's becoming available, where you see scientism failing, where you see quantum mechanics reveal that the will is at the ground of that. That observation, the human element, before there is energy, it's just compressed will. Just like matter is compressed energy. But I think that's everything for that one. But yes, you have to empty yourself of that form of vision first. And if you had any other faculties, and that's the thing with initiation too, that speaks to mysticism and initiation actually suits the more really rational types. It's fine for others to do it, but it's really, I'm just a normal, stable, rational guy. I liked science a lot when I was young and that sort of thing. It suits them better because they already do not see. The people that are more, they're a bit more unstable in mind and that sort of thing, they have to unlearn whatever that is. As the Lord says here, they have to become blind first to whatever that polluted. People that are into mediumship and that sort of thing, that has to actually be dissolved first. But the people that initiates are actually you're going through, you understand philosophy. That's what Hermetic philosophy is. And St. John of the Cross, people like this are very articulate and careful. The original theologians had this raw experience of theology itself as mysticism. That's what true theology and philosophy are. You can't be a true philosopher or a true theologian unless you have this raw experience, really. That's the truth of it, because it's the ground of all religion. So a big thank you to all our members. contributors, producers, who you see here in this plaque of honor. Without your financial help, this fellowship wouldn't be possible at all.